of South Africa. We've themed our conference Positioning South Africa's Diplomacy to Advance Our Domestic Priorities. We're joined this morning by our Director General, Mr. Zane Dangor, and we congratulate him on his appointment by Cabinet to this important position. We welcome Mr. Dangor to DIRCO. We hope that under his leadership, we will continue to strive to make DIRCO a center of excellence, and DG, that we will achieve a clean audit in a very short amount of time. Colleagues, the 2 years of COVID restrictions has been an extremely difficult period, but our country, South Africa, and our leaders have once again illustrated resilience in the face of adversity. And we've pulled together as a nation to strive to grow our economy and to strengthen our community collaboration and social cohesion. Of course, as a very young democracy, we continue to be a country in transition toward the ideals espoused in our Constitution and to strive to implement our international mandate, fully alert to both the opportunities as well as the challenges. We convene at a time of somewhat tectonic shifts in global affairs, most notably since the Russian Federation forcibly entered, without sanction of the UN Security Council, the territory of Ukraine in February this year. This has altered to a great degree the geopolitical landscape of our global community. We've begun to witness somewhat of a realignment of global power relations in response to the war and seen increased volatility in the global economy. All of these have affected South Africa and its national interests. And we've got to ensure that we learn to successfully navigate these developments. We, along with other non-aligned countries, have sought to assert our independence from the power games of the wealthy nations, seeking not to become embroiled in the politics of confrontation, name-calling, and aggression, but rather to promote a peaceful resolution to the conflict through dialogue and negotiation. Exactly what we warned at the beginning of this war is happening, that there would be atrocities, that there would be death, that there would be destruction of infrastructure. Our President Ramaphosa, conveyed to all key stakeholders that South Africa stands ready to support the peaceful resolution of this conflict with a view to bringing the violence to an end as speedily as possible. We are fully cognizant of the deliberate opposition to our call for peace and negotiations, but we continue to hold the view that, Excellencies, in the end, negotiations will end this conflict. Our approach is in keeping with the approach of members of the non-aligned movement since its creation in 1961, a time when developing countries in Africa and Asia committed themselves to maintaining independent foreign policies and extending the hand of friendship to all countries that reciprocated that friendship. We sought in this way to achieve a balancing of our national interests, and our priority was also to maintain robust trade relations with a plethora of countries with very different ideologies and practices, and to maintain this relationship across a wide political divide. We believe our approach, while being nuanced as necessary, is as valid today as it was then. Of course, we must be clear that our non-aligned position does not mean that we condone Russia's military intervention in Ukraine. We have said that this is indeed a violation of international law. We've always opposed violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states of the United Nations, in full keeping with the United Nations Charter. We are glad that today so many countries join us in this. We wish they had joined us when we called for the sovereignty of Palestine. We wish they had joined us when we called for the sovereignty of the people of Sahrawi. But they are learning and are now joining us. We hope this will be a standard-bearing approach in future as well. We've also decried the humanitarian disaster that has resulted from the ongoing military operations and have called for the urgent opening of humanitarian corridors and the provision of aid to the civilian population, which, as we had warned, bears the brunt of the suffering when violent confrontation breaks out. We have held these views not just for this war, but with respect to the infringement of the rights of the people of Palestine and many other countries where territorial integrity is not respected. It is clear that the need for a rule-based multilateral system is more urgent now than ever before in our global history. The very essence of the UN Charter is respect for international law, and we believe major powers should not be allowed to violate international law with impunity. What this war has exposed is the glaring double standards of the international community and the propensity they hold for the abuse of the United Nations body. The world has condemned Russia for its actions. It has made and continues to make all attempts to isolate it within the international community and in various fora, and attempted to cause maximum damage to its economy. Of course, imposing crippling unilateral sanctions and placing pressure on multinational companies to withdraw has been unprecedented in post-World War II international relations. We've never seen concomitant actions with regards to other conflicts, including those in which the laws of war and the UN Charter have been breached. We believe there needs to be consistency in the approach of the international community to countries that violate international law. When Israel launched sustained offensive military operations against the Gaza Strip, killing hundreds, flattening homes, burying civilians under the rubble, and devastating the already dilapidated infrastructure in such a small and densely populated area, the world failed to respond in the same way it has on Ukraine. That military sanction has never been met with sanctions, with isolation, with a disinvestment campaign. When the vast majority of Yemeni civilians have been on the verge of starvation as a result of a very violent bombing campaign which has devastated one of the poorest countries in the world, we've heard deafening silence. The list of unjust wars in which big powers have not done what they could is long. But we also are worried at the mainstream media narrative, which has tended to be on the side of the big powers, as they seem to have become part of an orchestrated propaganda campaign, either actively or at times unconsciously. We also, Honorable Excellencies, lament the continued suffering of our brothers and sisters in the countries of Cuba and Venezuela, who've also endured economic stagnation of their economies. In the case of Cuba, this has been the reality for over 6 decades. It's been our principal policy to support these countries when their economies have been brought to their knees, and to show our solidarity in light of the close bonds of friendship between our two nations. Of course, it's important that we highlight these issues, even given the recent barrage of criticism in the media being leveled against DELCO for our policy positions. It is important that we, as diplomatic representatives, redouble our efforts to explain to the South African public and our friends what drives our foreign policy. We also need our senior diplomats to speak with one voice and defend the government's position on these issues so that we avoid confusion and mixed messaging. I have been quite astounded at the manner in which diplomats represented here in South Africa, or representing their countries in South Africa, have publicly attacked our policy positions in a manner that implies that we are merely a subject to be instructed, something I hope you never do in the countries in which you represent South Africa. We believe that the long-term solution to these global injustices is a complete overhaul of the UN system, as our president has recently argued. The UN Security Council needs to be democratized, as its configuration is representative of the global balance of forces in the immediate post-World War II era, when much of the world was struggling under the scourge of colonialism. 4 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council were colonial powers when the UN was formed. And the decision-making structure of the Security Council was established in a manner that essentially protects their interests. Our heads of mission must continue to support our call for the democratization of the UN system and the promotion of a true, equal multilateralism. We will also work hard with you to ensure that the global preoccupation with the war in Ukraine and the shifting global power dynamics do not detract from the importance of the African agenda and the development imperatives of the global South. As I mentioned countries in conflict, I did not mention the suffering of our African brothers and sisters in the Sahel region. Starvation, displacement of an order that none of us are paying real attention to. We have to keep these issues at the center of the global agenda in multilateral fora. We also must focus on reversing the impacts of climate change, which is having devastating consequences for Africa and the global South. And we must ensure that these imperatives are not eclipsed by geopolitical tensions that emerge from time to time. We must address our national priorities for South Africa, those of responding to the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in our country. Our heads of mission must champion the message that our country is open for business. Economic diplomacy must influence the work of all our missions, and it should not be seen as mere rhetoric. The outcome of our efforts on the ground must result in increased foreign investment and trade. We also need to emphasize in our public statements the role that South African businesses are playing abroad, especially on the African continent. Of course, we are all aware that we don't have all the national revenue that we would want, and that would help us address the myriad challenges that face our country. But our heads of mission must be leaders in finding innovative ways to promote our country to the world. And it starts, dear Excellencies, with portraying a positive image of South Africa when you are both in public and in private. I know you have those private conversations with representatives of other countries, in the countries in which you're located. But when you're whispering together, whisper positive. Don't whisper negative about our country. We must portray to the world that South Africa has what it takes to compete on the world stage. You have to help our president and our government toward rebuilding investor confidence and indicating that South Africa, as a clearly sophisticated and promising emerging market, offers a unique combination of highly developed first world economic infrastructure and a vibrant market. I hope that you engage with prospective investors and take the initiative to personally forge linkages between companies abroad and producers and manufacturers in South Africa. In fact, I've said to the Director General that this is one of the performance elements he will be looking at in terms of how your particular mission is doing. Take advantage of the trend from the pandemic era of digital conferencing to facilitate linkages between South African agriculture producers and importers in your host market. We have over 28 Black-owned wine farms in our country that would greatly benefit from the thriving trade in this product, and your efforts would lead to that benefit. I encourage you to regularly meet with your chambers of commerce in the countries you're deployed to and become true economic ambassadors. You need to have a detailed understanding of our initiatives of special economic zones so that you identify and target potential partners abroad and share with them the opportunities that exist in the different sectors in our country. If you fail in this mission of attracting partners to our special economic zones, our zones will be empty nests waiting for the birds to come and roost. I also hope you will support our country and Africa's efforts to establish vaccine production on the continent. I believe you have a critical role in identifying initiatives which will support the President's investment drive and help the President achieve his commitment to raise over 1.2 trillion rand worth of investments in the 5 years of his first term. Our government has already met 65% of its stated target. The fourth investment conference, which took place 2 weeks ago, was a great success and illustrated our country's resilience and showcased many investment opportunities that our country intends to take advantage of. We congratulate the President in being steadfast on this foreign direct investment drive. Of course, we know that with ourselves, with the African continent and many developing countries, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the weaknesses of our public health system. It's been a wake-up call for the entire African continent. We need to continue to collaborate with partners abroad to ensure the successful vaccination of millions of Africans. We need to invest more in strengthening our health infrastructure so that we are better prepared to deal with future health crises. We must forge ahead with plans to enhance Africa's vaccine production ability, as well as to do that thing, to train hundreds of thousands of South African PhDs so that we have full-time researchers who can make our ambition a reality. We have a long road ahead in terms of achieving equity in this domain. Our actions have to include a robust, thriving, excellence higher education sector with ability in research and innovation. Our post-COVID agenda has to include economic recovery for the continent, for ourselves, and support for Africa's efforts. I don't need to say to you that our fortunes are inextricably linked to those of the continent. And so it is vital, as we do our work, that we champion Africa's development agenda, which will lead in the end to our own development and prosperity. We are very pleased that South Africa, led by our president as chair of the African Union, led to the beginning of trading of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Our companies in this country are poised to play a key role in taking up the opportunities these present for preferential access to other African markets. Of course, Africa is a key priority for us, but we have other cooperation partners that we must not neglect. Our trade with Europe, our trade with China, our trade with the United States must not diminish, must not be neglected. The strategic opportunities of shaping a refreshed, progressive global architecture through BRICS should not be undermined. And similarly, the immense opportunities in East Asia, in the broader Asia, and in the Middle East must be a firm part of our increasingly complex basket of diplomatic tasks. Any ambassador who believes that their job is easy doesn't understand foreign relations. It's complex, it's nuanced, it's difficult, but you have the ability to carry it through. What these tasks require are astute, strategic, focused, well-informed diplomats, fully cognizant of their value to South Africa. So, you are not the diplomat who will be recalled. You are not the diplomat who will be drunk in some foreign street. You are not the diplomat who will forget your purpose. I believe all of you fit these criteria I have referred to, and I wish you well in your continuing work. Now, allow me to perform the pleasurable task of introducing our president. He always reprimands me not to overdo it, but I want to. Our president, a trained lawyer, an astute businessman, a politician, someone that we hold in high regard and who we hope will achieve this R1 trillion investment for us. Your Excellency, I invite you to address our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Naledi Pandor. And thank you also to the Program Director, Deputy Minister Alvin Botes, and to Deputy Minister Kenneth Mashir Dlamini, and Director General, newly minted DG of International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Zain Dengo, ambassadors, your excellencies as ambassadors and high commissioners, consul generals, and all distinguished guests who are here. I'm really pleased to be in your midst today. It's actually good to be here. As I look around, I see all the familiar faces, many of whom that I see as we visit a number of countries. And when we do meet you in the countries where you are deployed, you look prim and proper and lovely and beautiful and handsome. I mean, handsome some of you. And you're looking exactly like that today. It's really a joy to see you all here collectively. Of course, it's always a joy to see you in countries where you are deployed. We meet at a time when the geopolitical architecture of the world is under great stress and faces huge challenges. And as representatives of our country, in the countries where you are deployed, you are essentially keen players and actors on the global stage where the foundations of world diplomacy are facing enormous shifts. So it does behove on you as our representatives to be absolutely clear on our foreign policy direction, and also to meet like this as we meet to discuss precisely those geopolitical shifts that the world is going through right now. The pandemic has upended national economies. It has also upended health systems and societal relations. It has also changed the diplomatic landscape, as we well know. I stand here to thank you all for the incredible work that you've all been doing on behalf of the people of South Africa, representing our country and flying our flag at this trying time. It is not upon you to give yourself a round of applause, but today I want you to do that. In addition to representing our interests in your host countries, you've had at this very trying time to provide services in emergency situations that was uncertain and rapidly changing. Our thanks in particular go to the missions that had to assist a number of South Africans scattered all over the world when moments of repatriations descended on them, particularly in the early days of the pandemic. Who will ever forget how that plane from China, Hunan, had to come and land in Limpopo, and the entire country's eyes were fixed on that plane which was carrying the South Africans. And thanks once again for the work that was done by our diplomats, not only in China, but in many parts of the country where you had to do real hard work to make sure that we care for those who were engulfed in the pandemic. So thank you once again for all that work. It was dangerous work, but it was essential work. And we thank you for all the work that you did, and I thank you on behalf of the people of South Africa. Over the past 2 years, and at different points, we have been swept up by both undesirable and favorable currents. The global response to the pandemic has seen incidents of narrow self-interest, protectionism, parochialism, and at times, even anti-Africanism. At the same time, we have also borne witness to the remarkable acts of solidarity and unity of purpose that we had never expected from a number of quarters around the world. We witnessed countries coming together to support each other, to access medical supplies, equipment, and different forms of economic relief, especially in developing economy countries. Our missions abroad played a large part in forging these relationships and will need to sustain these relationships in the years ahead. Whatever help our country received and whatever help and assistance our continent received, we know was engineered by the various interventions that many of you had initiated and had built over a number of years. Because all this did not just happen. It happened because our country's representatives have been at work over a long period preparing for eventualities such as these so that we can get the assistance, not only as South Africa, but also as our continent that we received. What has also been remarkable is the resilience and increasing self-reliance that has been forged in the fire of this crisis, particularly on the part of African nations. The AU's coordinated response to the pandemic has significantly advanced the cause of African unity. South Africa was closely involved in this effort as we assumed the chairship of the AU just weeks before COVID arrived on our shores. In the space of just 2 short years, the continent has made remarkable strides in strengthening institutional capacity, being able to have repositioned the CDC and made it an organization or an institution that is respected around the world. We also achieved remarkable results in building health system resilience and in advancing the case for the localization of life-saving medical supplies. What we can perhaps be proudest of is the principled stance that our country has taken on the issue of equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. It was South Africa, alongside India, that initially sponsored the proposal to the WTO for a temporary TRIPS waiver to enable countries to produce their own vaccines. This stance has put us firmly as a country on the side of social justice. Also, we were positioned very firmly on principled solidarity and reaffirmed our commitment to progressive internationalism. There are a great many lessons that have been learned from this pandemic. We've learned about the frailties of the global economy. The pandemic has heightened the dire material condition of the world's poor, the world's marginalized, and illustrated just how critical it was for us to make more efforts to overcome global inequality. We've learned also that as African countries, we will not meet the aspirations contained in Agenda 2063 if we are not united and if we do not speak with one single voice. If there ever was a time when our continent was united in approaching a calamity, this was when we approached COVID-19 together as a united continent. And we set out an example that many other continents have looked on to Africa with great envy. We have also realized that we need to develop and produce our own medical supplies, from diagnostics to therapeutics to vaccines and also pharmaceuticals, so that we can strengthen our national health systems and continental health institutions. The pandemic has challenged the notion that richer countries can successfully insulate themselves from the plight or the challenges that developing economy countries face. If the world is to successfully overcome this crisis, the altruism that brought communities and societies together in the early days of the pandemic must deepen as we work to overcome our domestic and global challenges. A little over a year ago, South Africa received its first COVID-19 vaccine shipment. Now, nearly 18 million South Africans are fully vaccinated, nearing about 44%. We still yearn to reach the 70%. The first COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing plant in Africa is now producing vaccines in South Africa for the domestic as well as the international market. This has been a phenomenal achievement on the part of our country, which is recognized globally as well. Also right here in South Africa, the WHO mRNA Vaccine Technology Transfer Hub, one of 6 on the continent, is working on technology and skills transfer in the licensing of the mRNA vaccines with local producers. The progress that we have made since little over a year ago is a product, amongst other things, of determined diplomacy. It is a product that you also, as our representatives around the world, have contributed in ensuring that it is achieved. You have taken principled positions as you have explained our position on the WTO TRIPS vaccine waiver, and you did not falter at all. In the course of the pandemic, South Africa's voice on the international stage has been amplified. And I should say we also thank you for the roles that you have played in making sure that our voice is heard in various courts, various centers around the world. So thank you to you as well. In positioning South Africa's diplomacy, the African agenda is paramount, as we all know. The continental response to COVID-19 has given the cause of African unity a new lease of life. Africa has found a new voice that is bold, but also a voice that is unapologetic, where we are able to stand upright and articulate our views, our cause as the African continent. As we look to recovery and reconstruction, I call on you as heads of our mission to use all the diplomatic tools at your disposal to advance the political, the economic, and social interests of our country, but of course, of our continent as well. The coming into operation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is the singular most important step towards continental economic integration. It is up to us to ensure that this treaty does succeed. Possibly more on us as South Africa, as the most industrialized country on our continent. Our missions must be at the forefront of building networks and being part of the activities that will strengthen the AfCFTA. South Africa has just completed the chairship of the African Peer Review Forum. The African Peer Review mechanism is, as we all know, a critical tool to advance good governance and democracy under the Agenda 2063. But beyond African countries themselves, there is still not enough awareness and not enough recognition of the importance of the APRM and what it has achieved. Even less is known even in our own country about South Africa's review processes and our implementation of the recommendations that have flown from our review or being reviewed by our peers as they have analyzed our own country and various initiatives that are underway and what we do. They've put forward recommendations as our peers, and we've been gladly able to implement quite a number of them. We have exposed ourselves to our peers on the continent and enabled and allowed them to look at us very critically. And this is often not known and recognized. Publicizing our successes in advancing democracy, good governance, and human rights must form an essential part of our public diplomacy processes. We must intensify the effort to silence the guns on our continent. We had this as an objective during our chairship of the AU, and of course, as we focused more of our attention during our chairship on COVID-19, this was a task that was not achieved. But fortunately, it has been extended by a number of other years so that we can see how best the continent, and of course with South Africa participating actively in those efforts, that we can silence the guns on our continent. The ongoing conflict in Ethiopia, the insurgency in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique province, the unconstitutional removal of governments in Burkina Faso, in Mali and Guinea show the depth and the extent of the challenges that our continent must confront. Because these are a blight on the image of the continent that has sought to ensure that the guns are silenced and democracy is embraced right from the north to the south and the west to the east of our continent. These developments must encourage us to do more and to act with greater urgency to remove every last vestige of war or conflict from our continent. Peace and stability is vital for development, as we all know, because you cannot really have meaningful economic development and social equity when there is war in your country. As a country, our fortunes are inextricably linked and bound with the security and prosperity of our continent. The war in Ukraine has had an extraordinary impact on global affairs, and these developments will continue to define international relations into the future. These are part of the tectonic shifts that are taking place at the geopolitical level. The conflict has caused extensive destruction and immense human suffering. As a country, we are committed to the articles of the United Nations Charter, including the principle that all member states shall settle and should settle their disputes by peaceful means. As Minister Pandor stated, we've taken a very clear and firm principled position on this. We support the principle that members should refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of other states. The conflict has exposed the inability of the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its mandate of maintaining international peace and security. The current formation of the United Nations Security Council, in our view as a continent, is outdated and unrepresentative, no doubt, because it disadvantages countries with developing economies, particularly our own continent. The entire peace and security architecture of the United Nations needs to be overhauled. Decision-making needs to be democratized so that the Council can be true to its mandate and move beyond the paralysis brought about by a few member states. Powerful countries must no longer be allowed to disregard international law. We need to curb the unilateral actions of these countries to shape global politics through aggression and coercive measures like the imposition of unilateral sanctions, for instance. In keeping with our strong commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflict, we have urged the parties to this conflict to pursue negotiated political solution. We have encouraged our international partners to consider confidence-building measures that will bring the parties closer together rather than adopt measures that will further alienate the parties and result in the escalation of the armed conflict. We are deeply concerned about the broader implications of the conflict in the Ukraine for the global economic recovery, also from COVID-19. This conflict has disrupted global supply chains. It has driven up the price of essential commodities and plunged the world into a new era of economic instability and uncertainty. Our continent is also affected negatively as a result of this conflict. Food and fuel prices are skyrocketing, affecting the livelihoods of many of the people on our continent. There is a need for us as Africa to develop a clear position on how we should respond to the consequences of this conflict. The AU needs to develop this clear position so that each of our countries, as we become affected, as we are, as South Africa, affected, it should be clear on how the continent should be handling the consequences of this conflict. The focus on the African agenda and resources committed to it have been diverted, and urgent global issues like climate change have been eclipsed by the rising global tensions. Our fundamental responsibility as a global community is to ensure that the human suffering that is unfolding in the Ukraine is brought to an end and that a sustainable and a just peace is achieved. As a global community, we have an equal responsibility to bring a decisive end to the human suffering that we see unfolding in a number of other parts of the world. In Yemen, in Palestine, in Libya, in Mali, in the Sahel region, in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Mozambique, in Ethiopia, and indeed in the Eastern DRC. We will continue our efforts to bring about peace in a number of these conflict zones. South Africa will continue to leverage its membership in multilateral fora to advance the cause of peace, because peace and the respect for human rights is the bedrock of our foreign policy. We will defend our non-aligned position and maintain an independent foreign policy as well. We will pursue our national interest as we pursue the common interests of our global humanity. We need to ensure that countries with developed economies honor their obligations to support developing economy countries in climate change mitigation and adaptation, as many developing economies were essentially not the cause for the climate change that the world is experiencing now. Specifically, we need to encourage more strategic partnerships to mobilize funding for a just transition to low-carbon economies. Now, as heads of missions, you are tasked with leading the drive to promote our country abroad. And Minister Pandor could not have said it any better. Because whatever you do, whatever you say, wherever you are, as our representatives, you should always remember that you are representing South Africa and the 60 million people that constitute our population. So it cannot be that you are representing yourself. You are representing the people of South Africa. And you act in the name of those people of this country. In this period of reconstruction and recovery, our foremost responsibility is, of course, to foster economic growth, but economic growth that will result in the creation of jobs. So we want you to be ambassadors, not just for our flag, but also for our economy. You need to seek out new ways to grow trade and attract investment into South Africa. And I must say, I've been really pleasantly encouraged as I travel to a number of those countries that I've visited, and I see how our high commissioners, how our ambassadors are so deeply immersed in the task of mobilizing investments for our country, talking to your counterparts as well as potential investors in the countries where you are deployed, articulating the great advantages of investing in South Africa. But I've also been so keenly impressed by the level of understanding that you have of the various sectors of our economy. Last night, I participated in the launch of a book, a handbook they call it, the Oxford Handbook of the South African Economy. I recommend it very highly for each one of you to get hold of this handbook. If it was Christmas already, I would have said each one of you will get a copy in your Christmas box. But I'm afraid it's not Christmas yet. But I do recommend that you should get a copy of this book because it outlines the structure of our economy, and it outlines also in a historical way where our economy has come from almost colonial times, but more apartheid times, right through the 27 years. And some of the initiatives that we have taken to turn our economy around, where we have succeeded and where we have not quite succeeded. And it addresses the challenges that our country faces, our economy faces. I recommend it because as you, many of you and nearly all of you have demonstrated your keen knowledge of our economy, as well as how you continue to mobilize for investments. This is the type of book that you should have on your bookshelf. Yes, a number of you come up with initiatives, interventions that are interesting as you talk to various investors in the countries where you are. You need to pave the way for outbound investment into existing and new markets. We count on you to market abroad the immense opportunities that exist in the South African economy. The Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan is our roadmap, and each of you have an essential role to play in its implementation and in its articulation as well. In the State of the Nation address in February, I provided an update to the country on our progress in implementing the ERRP, as we call it, but also in articulating our plans for the future. Our missions need to provide progress updates on structural reform, our infrastructure build program, our immigration reform, and new investments in all their engagements. And I'm glad to know that many of you do that already. We need to be briefing potential investors on the progress that we are making. I saw that during the investment conference, how investors are interested in the progress that we are making on our reform project. We should, for example, refer to the 4th South African Investment Conference, which was held just about 2 weeks ago, which resulted in some 332 billion rand in new investment pledges. We should report that we have now reached not 65%, Minister Pandor, which I heard you say, that we have reached 95% of the 1.3 trillion rand target we set. Some heads of mission have taken the initiative in recent years to bring business delegations to our investment conferences and to our tourism and mining indabas, film festivals, and aerospace shows. And I want to thank you and congratulate you for that, because this is the type of initiative that we want to see. More than, as I said earlier, being just diplomats, you are also economic envoys. You are envoys speaking on behalf, yes, of the president, but speaking on behalf of the people of South Africa. I'd like that to be prominent in your mind, because with the economic challenges that the world is facing now, economic diplomacy is what is often prominent for many countries. And I have seen this very, very keenly as I've interacted with a number of heads of government. We talk politics for a little while, but most of the interactions are on promoting the economic development in our various countries, and this is what we need to focus on. And one other aspect which I'd like to talk about is how, as we visit the countries where you are, we should, in the course of either a state visit or a binational, we should have economic forums or investment forums with the various business people in those countries, as well as bring business people from our country. Now, most of the work in the end has to be done by yourselves. As you mobilize the local business people and interest them in investing in South Africa, but also interacting with our various departments here, DTI, DIRCO, and a number of others, to mobilize business people who will travel with us. We found, as we visited West Africa towards the end of last year, that indeed a number of even emerging black business people came on the trip, and what flowed out of that trip or the visit to those 4 countries were business opportunities that a number of them were able to speak about. So essentially, you should see yourselves as economic envoys on behalf of your country, and that is why economic diplomacy has become so prominent and must become so prominent in the work that you do. Our heads of mission should look at the needs of our various provinces as well and understand the type of industries that we need to help lift people out of poverty. I have challenged our provinces, and I've said to all of them that they should prepare their investment books. Because as we travel around in some countries, they often say, what opportunities exist in your country? Now, provinces have started doing that, and a number of them have concluded their investment books, which you should have. But through the district development model as well, which we have started to implement, we are at the national, provincial, and local government level getting a much clearer position of the economic architecture in each of our provinces, but also at district level. And it is this that you should also get more interested in. In this respect, provinces can rely on the analysis undertaken as part of the district development model to decentralize and diversify our economy. I continue to challenge our provinces and our municipalities that they too must get involved in economic development and fostering growth. And I challenge them to be economic centers, because investments do not take place at the union buildings. Investments take place at the local government level, so that they themselves should create conducive environments for investors to come and invest in our local areas. And local government is the area where we face enormous challenges, as you would know, as we've often articulated. But we are addressing that on an ongoing basis because we want to reposition our local government entities, our municipalities at both local and district level, to be real reservoirs of economic activity. And we are encouraging our municipalities to correct the many things that have not been going well in our various local government areas, so that they become really attractive for investors. Budget constraint or twinning provinces and cities is one way to forge economic relations with countries abroad. And a number of you have already started doing that. You've been advocating for the twinning of various provinces and cities. And of course, we'd like to be more informed so that we have line of sight of all that. But that too encourages investment, because our own provinces and other provinces or states in other various parts of the world often see commonalities between themselves and those provinces that we have in our country, and that fosters economic growth as well. So we do encourage that, but with us having a clear line of sight of the compacts that are arrived at and the various activities that are embarked upon. Budget constraints have impacted on the work of our diplomats, we know that. But this does not mean we have to be any less effective. Yes, budget constraints have affected many aspects of our work, with our national finances hopefully becoming better and better as our tax collection continues to rise. We will most probably see some positive changes that will also help to enhance your work. But as our diplomats, you do need to be more innovative and find ways of practicing your craft. We need to adapt to digital diplomacy and host targeted seminars to sell our country. We need to scale up on public diplomacy efforts, including with South Africans living abroad. I've often heard a number of South Africans saying that they want to invest back in their home country. And those are the ones that we need to mobilize. Some of them are keen, they are willing, they just need to be herded in a particular direction and regain interest and attraction to their country, if not to return, but just to invest in our country. I just returned from Dubai Expo, where I had the opportunity to meet with South African business owner who is doing remarkable work in the hospitality industry. He has created a mini South African marketplace in Dubai, and South Africans just throng to the place that he has created. Of course, it is about commodities that we find in our local stores here, including food. And he says, since we have been so positive about fostering investments in our country, he has found his business rising and rising, but he continues to fly the flag. And he boasts, and I saw it, that with every hamburger he sells, with every rump steak that he sells from South Africa, to whomsoever he puts a South African flag on top of that. So that is fantastic. That's the best way to sell our country. And he sells all manner of things, including chakalaka, including, Iwisa maize and everything. And he brings everything from home right to Dubai. And he has created a mini South Africa precinct in that place. And South Africans working and living in Dubai just throng to this place because it gives them a home feeling. We need to popularize these stories and see how we can craft communications like the successful Homecoming Revolution campaign. Such initiatives can and do make a difference because ultimately we want all South Africans to be part of our country's development. We are emerging from the dark days of a devastating global pandemic that has also negatively affected us. And if we want to now fully understand how negatively it affected us, we have to think about those 2 million workers who lost their jobs. For 2 million people to lose their jobs within a period of 2 years is quite a mammoth number. Those who stood by us through this time have proven to be solid, dependable partners. This is no small part due to the diplomatic efforts of the men and the women who are in this room today. As we strive for an equitable recovery, we will continue to count on you to be our emissaries for economic growth, just as you helped us to get life-saving equipment and then vaccines. We want you now to bring investments to our country. I wish I could stay here with you all day, but I have to fly to East London, where we are launching from a Japanese automaker a particular line of manufacturing where they've invested a lot of money. So I have to go there. But I do wish you well in the deliberations that you will have here today. Your deliberations during this conference are going to be much more important, possibly much more important than the previous ones, because we have to analyze and also fully understand your own take as our emissaries of what is happening, not only globally, but also in your own countries, because we continue to face challenges that do impact on our own foreign policy. I urge you to continue to serve your country with pride and to make our foreign missions centers of excellence. Continue with your most urgent task of continuing to build a better South Africa and realizing a better Africa, and in the end, a better world, notwithstanding the challenges that the world continues to face right now. Remember that you are South Africans, and you are the best that we have deployed to various parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the President of Republic of South Africa. It was indeed illuminating and the blueprint for the recalibration and renewal of our foreign policy and the concomitant responsibility to reposition South Africa